The slave market on Zenthar Prime buzzed with activity as buyers from across the galaxy examined their potential purchases. Among the cramped cages lined up in the shadowy corners, 5 small creatures huddled together, their golden eyes darting nervously at every sound. These were Predotar cubs, barely old enough to walk properly, their spotted fur matted and dull from weeks of poor treatment. The Predators were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most feared warrior races. Adult Predators stood nearly 3 meters tall, with powerful limbs, razor-sharp claws, and an intelligence that made them formidable opponents in any conflict. Their homeworld had been destroyed in a recent war, and now the survivors were scattered across the galaxy, many ending up in slavery. But these were just bobbies. The smallest couldn't have been more than 6 months old, whimpering softly as she pressed against her siblings for warmth. The cage was barely large enough for all 5 of them, with rusty bars and a floor covered in dirty straw that hadn't been changed in days. "Look at these little beasts," sneered Gorth, a Velian slave trader with purple skin and 4 arms. He poked a metal rod through the bars, making the cubs scramble backward. "Still got some fight in them. That's good. Buyers like spirit they can break." His assistant, a nervous Trilek with bulging eyes, checked his datapad. "The Calaxian Mining Consortium wants strong workers. These cubs will grow up to be perfect for the deep shaft work. No one else can survive those conditions." "Perfect," Gorth replied. "And if they don't survive the training, well, we didn't pay much for them anyway." The cubs had been through this conversation many times. Even though they were young, they understood enough of the common galactic language to know their fate. The largest cub, a male with distinctive black stripes across his golden fur, growled softly. His name was Razak, and even at 8 months old, he was already showing the protective instincts of his species. Next to him, his sister Kira pressed closer, her green eyes wide with fear. She was the smartest of the group, always listening, always learning. The other 3 were younger, Thorn, Myra, and little Zeta, who was so small she could barely keep up when they were forced to walk. "Feeding time," announced a guard, sliding a bowl of gray slop through a slot in the cage. The substance was barely edible, designed to keep them alive, but nothing more. The cubs had learned to share, with the older ones always making sure little Zeta got enough to eat. As they ate in silence, Razak's ears perked up. He heard something unusual, footsteps, but not the heavy boots of the guards or the clicking claws of the alien buyers. These footsteps were different, softer, more careful. Through the dim lighting of the slave market, a figure approached. It was bipedal, wearing simple brown clothing and moving with a quiet confidence that seemed out of place in this chaotic environment. The figure stopped in front of their cage, and Razak found himself looking into the strangest eyes he had ever seen. They were blue, not the electric blue of a Calaxian or the deep blue-black of a Vorthak. These were a soft, warm blue, set in a pale face with hair the color of sand. The creature was small by galactic standards, maybe 2 meters tall, with no visible claws or natural weapons. "Hello there," the creature said softly, and Razak was surprised to hear kindness in the voice. It was speaking the common language, but with an accent Razak had never heard before. "What do we have here?" Gorth appeared quickly, his business instincts sharp. "Ah, honored customer, you have excellent timing. These are genuine Predator cubs, very rare since their homeworld was destroyed. They'll grow into the finest workers you could imagine. Strong, intelligent, and with proper training, absolutely obedient." The strange creature ignored Gorth entirely, focusing on the cubs. Slowly, it crouched down to their eye level. "My name is Marcus," it said gently. "I'm human." Kira tilted her head. She had never heard of humans before. In her young mind, she filed away this new information while studying Marcus's face. There was something different about this one. Where other potential buyers had looked at them with greed or disgust, Marcus looked at them with something else entirely. Something that made her chest feel warm. "How much for all 5? Marcus asked, still not looking at Gorth. Gorth's 4 eyes widened with surprise. Most buyers wanted only 1 or 2 slaves, and usually the strongest ones. "All 5? Well, honored customer, that would be quite expensive. These cubs will grow into valuable workers. I couldn't let them go for less than 50,000 credits." Marcus finally stood and turned to face the slave trader. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made even Gorth take a step back. "I said, how much for all 5? 50,000 credits, Gorth repeated, but less confidently now. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He touched it a few times and then showed it to Gorth. Transfer complete, 50,000 credits. Gorth stared at the device in shock. Most customers negotiated for hours trying to bring down the price. This human had simply paid the full amount without argument. Yes. Well, certainly, honored customer. They're yours immediately. As Gorth fumbled for the cage keys, Marcus knelt down again. It's going to be okay now, he whispered to the cubs. You're safe. Razak didn't understand why, but he believed the human. Something about Marcus's voice, his gentle movements, the way he looked at them as if they were precious rather than property. For the first time in weeks, Razak felt something other than fear. The cage door creaked open, and Marcus carefully reached inside. Instead of grabbing them roughly like the guards always did, he held out his hand palm up, letting them choose whether to approach. Little Zeta, who was usually the most frightened, surprised everyone by walking forward first. Marcus gently scooped her up, supporting her properly and keeping her close to his chest where she could feel warmth and hear his heartbeat. There we go, little one. You're so brave. One by one, the other cubs allowed Marcus to help them out of the cage. They stayed close together, uncertain but no longer terrified. Marcus spoke to them continuously in that same gentle voice, telling them they were safe now, that no one would hurt them anymore. Where will you be taking them? Gorth asked, trying to sound casual. Information about buyers could be valuable for future sales. Marcus looked at him with those blue eyes, and Gorth felt a chill run down his spine. That's not your concern anymore. Our business is finished. As they walked away from the slave market, the cubs staying close to Marcus's legs, Razak looked back once at the rows of cages still filled with other slaves. He didn't understand why this human had chosen them, but he was grateful beyond words. Marcus led them to a small transport ship parked at the spaceport. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and well-maintained. The interior was warm and comfortable, with soft surfaces and plenty of space to move around. After weeks in that cramped cage, it felt like a palace. Are you hungry? Marcus asked as he activated the ship's systems. I have real food here, meat, fruit, clean water. The cubs' eyes widened. They hadn't seen real food since before their capture. Marcus brought out containers filled with fresh meat, cut into small pieces perfect for young predators. There were also fruits they had never seen before, sweet and juicy. And the water was crystal clear, not the stale liquid they had been given in the cage. As they ate, Marcus worked at the ship's controls. We're going to my home, he explained. It's a quiet planet called Haven, lots of open space, forests, mountains, you'll like it there. Kira looked up from her food. Why? She asked softly. It was the first word any of them had spoken since their capture. Marcus turned to look at her, his expression serious. Because everyone deserves to be free, little one, because no child should be in a cage. But we're Predators, Razak said, finding his voice as well. Everyone fears us. Marcus smiled, and the cubs were amazed to see that it wasn't a predatory expression at all, but something warm and genuine. I don't fear you. I see 5 frightened children who need someone to care for them. As the ship lifted off from Zenthar Prime, leaving the slave market far behind, the cubs pressed against the windows to watch the planet disappear. They were flying toward an unknown future, but for the first time since their world had been destroyed, they felt hope. During the long journey through hyperspace, Marcus showed them around the ship. There were comfortable sleeping areas with soft blankets, a recreational area with games and books, and even a small medical bay where Marcus checked each of them for injuries or illness. The cubs had minor malnutrition and several small wounds from their captivity, but nothing that wouldn't heal with proper care. Why are you helping us? Kira asked as Marcus gently treated a cut on her paw. Because it's the right thing to do, Marcus replied simply. Where I come from, we believe that the strong should protect the weak. You 5 are strong in spirit, but right now you need protection, so that's what I'm going to give you. But we don't have anything to give you back, Thorn said quietly. He was a thoughtful cub, always worried about fairness and obligations. Marcus finished bandaging Kira's paw and looked at all 5 cubs seriously. You don't owe me anything. This isn't a transaction. When you're older and stronger, if you choose to help others who need it, that will be payment enough. That night, as the ship traveled through the endless darkness of space, the cubs huddled together on the soft sleeping mats Marcus had provided. For the first time in months, they felt safe enough to truly rest. But they also talked quietly among themselves in their native language, which Marcus had not shown any sign of understanding. He could have bought stronger slaves, Razak whispered. Adult warriors, why did he choose cubs? Maybe he's planning to train us as his personal guards, Myra suggested. She was always suspicious, always looking for hidden motives. Kira shook her head. Did you see how he touched us, how he spoke to us? That's not how someone handles property, that's how someone handles. She paused, searching for the right word in their language. Family, little Zeta finished softly. The others looked at her in surprise. Zeta was the youngest and usually didn't contribute much to their discussions. But now she was looking at them with those large, dark eyes, and there was a wisdom there that seemed beyond her months. He doesn't want to own us, she continued. He wants to protect us like parents protect cubs. The idea was so foreign, so impossible after everything they had been through, that they could barely comprehend it. But as they drifted off to sleep, each of them held onto that tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, little Zeta was right. The next morning, Marcus taught them how to use the ship's entertainment systems, showing them videos of distant worlds and teaching them new words in several different languages. He explained that humans came from a planet called Earth and that they had only recently made contact with the galactic community. Humans are new to space? Razak asked, fascinated despite himself. Very new, Marcus confirmed. Most species have been traveling between stars for thousands of years. We've only been doing it for a few decades. Then how did you know about the slave market? Kira asked. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Because slavery exists in many forms throughout the galaxy, and when humans discover it, we do what we can to stop it. He showed them images of Earth, blue oceans, green forests, cities filled with humans of all different colors and sizes. The cubs were amazed to see that humans came in so many varieties, and that they all seemed to live together peacefully. On Earth, Marcus explained, we learned long ago that diversity makes us stronger. Different perspectives, different skills, different ways of thinking. We're better together than apart. As the journey continued, the cubs began to relax more and more. Marcus never raised his voice, never made sudden movements that might frighten them. He was patient when they spilled food or when little Zeta had nightmares. He answered their endless questions about humans and Earth and the galaxy beyond. Slowly, very slowly, they began to trust. But trust was still fragile, and fear was never far away. When the ship's proximity alarm sounded as they approached their destination, all 5 cubs immediately tensed, ready to run or hide. The sound reminded them too much of the alarms at the slave market. It's all right, Marcus said quickly, noticing their reaction. We're just arriving at Haven. The alarms are just letting us know we're entering the planet's atmosphere. Through the ship's windows, they could see a world of green and blue, with white clouds drifting across continents. It looked nothing like the industrial worlds they had seen during their captivity. This planet was alive, growing, beautiful. Welcome to your new home, Marcus said softly, as the ship began its descent toward a landing platform surrounded by trees and gardens. The cubs pressed against the windows, their eyes wide with wonder. After so much darkness and confinement, the sight of open sky and endless green spaces was almost overwhelming. As the ship touched down with a gentle thump, Marcus began gathering supplies from the storage compartments. There are some things you need to know about Haven, he said. First, you're not the only refugees here. This planet is home to beings from many different species who needed a safe place to start over. He paused in his packing to look at them seriously. Second, you have choices here. You can stay with me as long as you want, or you can choose to live with other families if you prefer. You can learn any skills that interest you. You can explore, play, study, or just rest, whatever you need to heal and grow. Razak felt tears gathering in his eyes, something that hadn't happened since he was a very young cub. You would really let us choose? Of course, Marcus replied, as if the question surprised him. Freedom isn't just about not being in a cage. It's about having the right to make your own decisions about your life. As they prepared to leave the ship, Kira noticed that Marcus was nervous. His hands shook slightly as he checked their supplies, and he kept looking toward the ship's exit as if he was worried about something. What's wrong? She asked quietly. Marcus knelt down to her level, his blue eyes serious. I want you to know that you're safe here, but I also want you to understand that some of the other beings on Haven have been hurt badly by their experiences. Some of them might be afraid of Predators at first, because they've only known your people as warriors or slaves. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. If anyone makes you feel unwelcome or unsafe, you tell me immediately. This is your home now, and no one has the right to make you feel otherwise. The cubs exchanged glances. They had expected this. Their reputation preceded them wherever they went. But hearing Marcus acknowledge it directly and promise to protect them from it meant more than they could express. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, moving toward the ship's exit controls. The 5 cubs moved closer together, drawing strength from each other as they had learned to do during their darkest days. But now they also moved closer to Marcus, accepting him as part of their pack in a way that would have been impossible just days before. "We're ready," Razak said, speaking for all of them. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss, and warm, sweet-smelling air flowed into the cabin. Air that carried the scent of growing things and clean water and freedom. Together, they stepped out into their new world. The landing platform was surrounded by gardens filled with plants from dozens of different worlds. Paths led away in several directions, winding between trees and flower beds toward buildings that looked more like homes than institutions. In the distance, they could see mountains rising against a blue sky filled with white clouds. And everywhere there were people, not crowds but small groups and individuals going about their daily lives. The cubs saw species they recognized and others that were completely new to them. But what struck them most was that everyone seemed relaxed, unhurried, peaceful. A small group approached the landing platform, and the cubs tensed slightly. But Marcus's hand gently touched Razak's shoulder, a silent reminder that they were safe. The group consisted of 3 beings: a tall, thin creature with silver skin and large black eyes, a stocky humanoid covered in brown fur, and another human with darker skin and kind eyes like Marcus's. "Welcome back, Marcus," the human said warmly. "I see your mission was successful." "More than successful, Sarah," Marcus replied. "I'd like you to meet Razak, Kira, Thorn, Myra, and Zeta. Everyone, this is Sarah. She's the director of Haven Colony." Sarah crouched down to the cub's eye level just as Marcus had done at the slave market. "Welcome to Haven," she said gently. "We're so glad you're here." The silver-skinned being stepped forward. "I am Dr. Venn," they said in a melodious voice. "I'm a physician. Would you allow me to examine you to make sure you're healthy?" The cubs looked to Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "Dr. Venn is one of the best healers in the galaxy," he said. "They've helped many refugees recover from their experiences." The furry humanoid was the last to speak, and when they did, it was in the Predotar language. "Little ones," they said in the ancient tongue of their homeworld, "I am Gromax of the Ursine Collective. I know your pain, for I too was enslaved. Here you will find peace." The cubs gasped in surprise. No non-Predator had ever spoken their language to them before. It felt like hearing a piece of home in this strange new place. As the group walked toward the colony's main area, Marcus explained how Haven had been founded. Several species came together to create a place where refugees could heal and build new lives. Humans provided the initial resources and organization, but now it's truly a joint effort. They passed a school where children of various species were playing together in a courtyard. They saw workshops where adults were learning new trades or teaching traditional crafts from their homeworlds. They saw gardens where food was grown for the entire community, and they saw small homes where families had been reunited or new families had formed. "How many people live here?" Kira asked, her natural curiosity beginning to overcome her fear. "About 3,000 right now," Sarah answered. "We're growing slowly, making sure we can take care of everyone properly." They stopped in front of a comfortable-looking building surrounded by flowering trees. "This is where you'll be staying while you settle in," Marcus explained. "I have a room here too, so I'll be nearby whenever you need me." Dr. Venn conducted gentle medical examinations in a sunny room filled with soft cushions and warm blankets. The cubs were still malnourished and showed signs of stress, but nothing that couldn't be healed with time, good food, and proper care. "You're remarkably resilient," Dr. Venn told them. "Your bodies are already beginning to recover. With proper nutrition and exercise, you'll be completely healthy within a few months." That evening, Marcus showed them to their rooms. Each cub had their own space, but the doors between the rooms could be left open so they could still stay together when they wanted to. The beds were soft, The blankets were warm, and there were windows that looked out onto the peaceful gardens. "Tomorrow," Marcus said as he tucked little Zeta into her bed, "we'll explore more of the colony. You can see the school, the library, the workshops. You can decide what you'd like to learn or do." "Will you stay with us?" Zeta asked sleepily. "For as long as you want me to," Marcus promised. As the cubs settled in for their first night of true freedom, they could hear the gentle sounds of the colony around them. Distant laughter, soft music, the whisper of wind through the trees. It was so different from the harsh noises of the slave market or the sterile hum of the transport ship. "Do you think this is real?" Myra whispered into the darkness. "Real enough," Razak replied quietly. "And even if it's not forever, it's better than what we had." But deep in his heart, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, it really was forever. That maybe this human named Marcus really had rescued them not for profit or personal gain, but simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. It was a revolutionary concept for 5 young beings who had known only captivity and cruelty. But as they drifted off to sleep in their warm, safe beds, surrounded by the sounds of peace and freedom, they began to understand that sometimes the impossible really could be true. Sometimes, when the universe seemed darkest, a single act of kindness could change everything. And tomorrow, they would begin to discover just how much their lives were about to change. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of their new home, waking the cubs naturally for the first time in months. No harsh alarms, no shouting guards, no metal bars casting shadows across their faces. Just warm, golden light and the gentle sounds of birds singing in the trees outside. Zeta was the first to wake, as she often was. But instead of the immediate fear that had gripped her every morning since her capture, she felt something wonderful: safety. She stretched her small limbs and padded to the window where she could see other children playing in the gardens below. "Good morning, little one," Marcus said softly from the doorway. He had learned to move quietly around them, understanding that sudden noises still made them nervous. "Did you sleep well?" Zeta nodded, then surprised herself by running to him and wrapping her arms around his legs in a hug. Marcus gently picked her up, and she could hear his heartbeat again, steady and comforting. One by one, the other cubs woke and gathered around Marcus. They had developed a morning routine during their week on Haven: breakfast together, then exploration of their new world, then lessons in the afternoon, and quiet time in the evening. "Today is special," Marcus announced as they made their way to the common dining area. "Today, you get to meet some other young Predators who live here." The cubs stopped walking and stared at him in shock. "Other Predators here?" "There are others like us?" Razak asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Marcus smiled. "Not many, but a few families have made their way to Haven over the past year. There are 3 other cubs about your age, and several adults who have been helping to build the colony." This news was overwhelming. The cubs had begun to believe they might be the only survivors of their species. The thought that there were others, that they weren't alone in the universe, brought tears to more than one set of golden eyes. In the dining hall, they were greeted by the wonderful smell of fresh food and the sight of beings from dozens of different species sharing meals and conversation. A few turned to look at the newcomers, but the gazes were curious rather than fearful or hostile. "There they are," Marcus said, pointing toward a corner table where 3 young Predators sat with an adult female of their species. The cubs' hearts raced as they approached. The adult female looked up as they drew near, and her face broke into a warm smile. She was tall and strong, with the distinctive golden fur and green eyes of their people, but her expression was gentle and welcoming. "Hello, little ones," she said in their native language. "I am Elder Casa. Welcome to our new pride." The 3 young Predators at the table stood up shyly. 2 were males about Razak's age, and 1 was a female slightly older than Kira. They had the healthy, well-fed look of cubs who had been cared for properly, their fur glossy and their eyes bright. "I'm Drac," said one of the males, stepping forward boldly. "This is my brother Fenris, and this is Lyra. We've been waiting for you." "Waiting for us?" Kira asked, confused. "Elder Casa told us that Marcus had gone to rescue more of our people," Lyra explained. "We've been hopping every day that you would come home safely." The word home hit the cubs like a physical blow. Home, not a temporary shelter, not a way station before being moved somewhere else. Home. "Come," Elder Casa said gently. Sit with us, share our morning meal, and tell us your names." As they ate, the cubs learned the stories of their new companions. Drac and Fenris had been rescued from a fighting ring where young Predators were forced to battle each other for the entertainment of wealthy spectators. Lyra had been found working in the dangerous mines of a distant asteroid, the sole survivor of a transport ship that had been attacked by pirates. "All of us were brought here by humans," Drac explained between bites of fresh fruit. "Different humans, but all working together to find our people and bring them to safety." "There are others like Marcus?" Thorn asked. "Many others," Elder Casa confirmed. "The humans have created what they call an underground railroad, helping enslaved beings escape to freedom. They ask for nothing in return." "But why?" Myra asked, voicing the question that had haunted all of them. "What do they gain?" Elder Casa was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "When I first arrived here, I asked Marcus the same question. His answer was simple but profound. He said that humans believe in something they call inherent dignity. The idea that every sentient being has value simply by existing, regardless of their species, their strength, or their usefulness." She gestured around the dining hall, where dozens of different species were sharing the morning meal in peace. "Look around you. See how many different kinds of beings are here. Predators, humans, Trilek, Ursine, Calaxians who left their militant society, Vorthak refugees, even some reformed Velians like Gorth who used to be slave traders themselves." The cubs followed her gaze, amazed to see the diversity. At one table, a group of insectoid beings were deep in conversation with several humans. At another, furry creatures that looked like living teddy bears were playing a card game with reptilian humanoids. "This is what humans call their vision for the galaxy," Elder Casa continued. "Not conquest or domination, but cooperation. Not slavery or oppression, but freedom and mutual respect." After breakfast, Marcus led all 8 young Predators on a tour of the colony's educational facilities. The school was unlike anything they had ever seen. Instead of rigid classrooms and harsh discipline, there were open learning spaces filled with interactive displays, comfortable seating areas, and windows that looked out onto beautiful gardens. "Learning here is different," explained Dr. Chen, a human teacher with kind eyes and graying hair. "We don't believe in forcing knowledge into unwilling minds. Instead, we help students discover what interests them and then support their natural curiosity." She showed them the science labs, where students of various species were conducting experiments in biology, chemistry, and physics. In one corner, a young Trilek was growing crystals while a human child watched in fascination. In another area, 2 Ursine cubs were working with a Calaxian teenager to build a small robot. "What if we don't know what interests us?" Kira asked quietly. "Then we help you explore," Dr. Chen replied with a smile. "There's no rush, no pressure. Some of our students spend months just experiencing different subjects before they find their passion." In the arts building, they found students creating music, visual art, and literature. A group of mixed species was rehearsing a play that combined elements from all their different cultures. The sound of laughter and creative energy filled the air. But it was in the library that the cubs truly began to understand the scope of what the humans had created. The massive building contained not just books and digital files, but an entire archive of cultural knowledge from hundreds of different species. "We're working to preserve the heritage of every being who comes to Haven," explained the head librarian, an elderly human woman named Ms. Rodriguez. "Many refugees arrive with nothing but their memories. We help them record their stories, their traditions, their knowledge, so that nothing is lost." She led them to a section dedicated to Predator culture, where Elder Casa and the other adults had been working to recreate the history and traditions of their people. There were recordings of ancient songs, descriptions of traditional ceremonies, and even architectural plans for the great cities that had once stood on their homeworld. "Your people had a beautiful culture," Ms. Rodriguez said gently. "We want to make sure that beauty isn't forgotten." Little Zeta reached out to touch one of the displays, which showed images of Predator artwork. "I remember," she whispered. "My mother used to sing songs like these." "Would you like to record what you remember?" Ms. Rodriguez asked. "Even small memories from cubs your age are precious. They help us understand how your people lived their daily lives." The afternoon was spent in what the humans called integration activities, structured play and learning, designed to help different species understand each other better. The cubs found themselves working with human children on building projects, playing games that combined elements from different cultures, and sharing stories about their experiences. What amazed them most was how naturally the human children accepted them. There was no fear, no prejudice, no assumption that predators were inherently dangerous. The human cubs were simply curious, asking questions about their fur, their claws, their different ways of seeing and hearing the world. "Do you really see better in the dark than we do?" asked Emma, a human girl about Kira's age. "Much better," Kira replied, then demonstrated by accurately describing objects in a darkened corner of the room. "That's so cool," Emma exclaimed. "Can you teach me how to move as quietly as you do? I'm trying to learn stealth skills for the exploration games we play." For the first time since their rescue, Kira felt proud of her Predotar abilities rather than afraid of them. These human children saw her enhanced senses and natural agility as interesting gifts rather than threatening weapons. During the afternoon break, Marcus found the cubs sitting together under a large tree, watching the other children play. They seemed thoughtful, almost overwhelmed by all the new experiences. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling down beside them on the grass. "Confused," Razak admitted. "Good confused, but still confused." "Can you tell me why?" Razak looked at his siblings, drawing strength from their presence. "Everything we were taught about the galaxy was wrong. We were told that only the strong survive, that weaker species exist to serve the stronger ones. We were told that kindness is weakness and that trust is dangerous." He gestured toward the playground, where children of a dozen different species were playing together happily. "But here, the humans are clearly one of the physically weaker species, yet they're the ones who created all this. They're the ones saving everyone else, and they do it through kindness and cooperation, not through force." Marcus nodded seriously. "Your people were taught those things because someone wanted to control you. When beings believe that strength is the only thing that matters, they become easier to manipulate by those who claim to be stronger." "But humans are strong," Kira observed, "just not in the way we expected." "Exactly. Humans are strong in their unity, in their refusal to abandon the weak, in their ability to see potential instead of just current reality." Marcus looked at each of the cubs in turn. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you five?" They nodded eagerly. "I see Razak, who protected his siblings even when he was terrified himself. That's not weakness, that's the strongest thing anyone can do. I see Kira, whose curiosity and intelligence never dimmed even in the darkest circumstances. I see Thorn, who always thinks of others before himself. I see Myra, whose caution and wisdom help keep everyone safe. And I see Zeta, who has the courage to trust even after being hurt so badly." Each cub felt tears gathering in their eyes as Marcus continued. "Those qualities, protection, curiosity, selflessness, wisdom, courage, those are the things that make civilizations great. Not claws or fangs or physical power, but the strength of character that makes someone willing to sacrifice for others." That evening, the cubs had dinner with Elder Casa and the other young Predators. The conversation flowed easily in their native language, touching on memories of home, hopes for the future, and amazement at their current circumstances. "Tell me," Elder Casa said as the meal wound down, "what do you think of your new life here?" "It's wonderful," Zeta said immediately, "but it feels too good to be true." "I understand that feeling," Elder Casa replied. "I felt the same way for months after my arrival, but I've learned something important. Sometimes good things really do happen. Sometimes the universe produces beings whose nature is to help rather than to hurt." "But why us?" Myra asked. "Why were we worth saving?" Elder Casa looked at her with infinite gentleness. "Because you exist, because you have minds and hearts and souls, because you have the capacity to love and to grow and to contribute something beautiful to the universe. No other reason is needed." Later that night, as the cubs settled into their beds, they talked quietly among themselves about their day. "Do you think we'll ever be able to repay them?" Thorn asked. "Marcus said we don't owe them anything," Kira replied. "But I want to do something. I want to help others the way they helped us." "What could we do?" Razak wondered. "Learn," Zeta said firmly. "Learn everything we can, grow up strong and wise, and then go out and help other cubs who are still in cages." The others stared at their youngest sibling in amazement. In her simple words, she had captured something profound. The idea that rescue was not an ending but a beginning. that their salvation carried with it a responsibility to extend that same salvation to others. Over the following weeks, the cubs threw themselves into learning with an enthusiasm that delighted their teachers. Razak discovered a passion for engineering, working on projects to design better shelters for refugees. Kira gravitated toward communications and linguistics, learning to speak dozens of different languages so she could help newly rescued beings feel welcome. Thorn found his calling in agriculture, learning to grow food that could sustain the diverse nutritional needs of many different species. Myra was drawn to security and logistics, understanding instinctively how to organize safe transport and housing for vulnerable refugees. And little Zeta, despite her young age, showed a remarkable talent for healing, working alongside Dr. Venn to learn medical skills. But perhaps more importantly, they learned about human culture and history. They studied the long, difficult path that humanity had taken from a divided, often brutal species to the unified, compassionate civilization they had become. They learned about human heroes who had fought against slavery and oppression on their own world, often at great personal cost. Humans weren't always like this, Marcus explained during one of their evening discussions. For most of our history, we were as divided and violent as any other species. We had slavery, war, genocide, oppression of the weak by the strong. What changed? Kira asked, fascinated. We learned, slowly and painfully, that our greatest strength came from working together rather than fighting each other. We discovered that the diversity we had once feared was actually our greatest asset, and we developed technologies that allowed us to communicate and cooperate across vast distances. He pulled up historical records on his tablet, showing them images from Earth's past and present. When we finally reached the stars and discovered that slavery and oppression existed on a galactic scale, we knew we couldn't stand by and do nothing. Everything we had learned about the value of freedom and cooperation demanded that we act. But you're just one species among hundreds, Razak pointed out. How can you make such a difference? Marcus smiled. The same way change always happens. One person helping one other person, then two people helping two others, then four helping four, and so on. Every being we rescue becomes someone who can help rescue others. Every act of kindness inspires more kindness. He gestured toward the cubs. Look at yourselves. A month ago you were helpless victims, but already you're thinking about how to help other victims. That's how change spreads not through force but through inspiration. As the weeks turned into months, the cubs began to understand that they were not just refugees being cared for, but active participants in something much larger. Haven Colony was not just a sanctuary, but a training ground for a new kind of civilization. A place where beings from across the galaxy could learn to work together, to value cooperation over competition, to choose compassion over cruelty. They met other humans who had dedicated their lives to the rescue and rehabilitation of enslaved beings. Some were former soldiers who had turned their skills toward liberation rather than conquest. Others were teachers, doctors, engineers, and artists who used their talents to build better worlds. Still others were former slaves themselves, humans who had been captured in the early days of galactic contact and had experienced firsthand the horrors they now worked to prevent. The most powerful force for change, Marcus told them one evening as they watched the sunset from their favorite spot under the great tree, is not anger or revenge, but hope. When beings see that a better way is possible, they naturally move toward it. Is that what happened with you? Zeta asked. Did someone show you a better way? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. When I was young, I was angry at the universe for all the suffering I saw. I wanted to fight everyone and everything that caused pain. But then I met someone who showed me that building something beautiful was more powerful than destroying something ugly. He looked at each of the cubs with those kind blue eyes. Now I see that same potential in you. You could become warriors, using your natural abilities to fight against oppression. But you could also become builders, using those same abilities to create something new and wonderful. Why not both? Razak asked thoughtfully. Why not warriors who fight to protect the builders and builders who create safe spaces for the warriors to rest? Marcus smiled broadly. Now you're thinking like a human, he said with obvious pride. That night, as they had done every night since their arrival, the cubs gathered in Zeta's room for their evening talk. But this time, the conversation was different. Instead of wondering about their future, they began planning for it. When we're adults, Razak said, I want to design ships that can rescue people from places others can't reach. I want to learn every language in the galaxy, Kira added, so no one ever feels alone because they can't communicate. I want to grow food that can keep everyone healthy and strong, Thorne said. I want to keep everyone safe during the dangerous parts of rescue missions, Myra declared. And I want to heal the hurt in people's hearts and bodies, Zeta finished. They looked at each other, seeing not the frightened, broken cubs they had been, but the strong, capable adults they were becoming. In their simple declarations, they had sketched out the framework for their own version of the human underground railroad, a network of skilled, dedicated beings working together to spread freedom and hope throughout the galaxy. Outside their window, the lights of Haven Colony twinkled peacefully in the darkness. In workshops and classrooms, other former slaves were learning skills that would let them contribute to the growing network of liberation. In communications centers, humans were coordinating rescue missions to dozens of different worlds. In medical facilities, beings who had suffered terrible abuse were slowly healing in body and spirit. It was a small beginning in a vast galaxy filled with suffering and oppression. But it was a beginning nonetheless, and every day it grew stronger. As the cubs drifted off to sleep, they carried with them dreams not of revenge against those who had hurt them, but of liberation for those still suffering. They dreamed of a galaxy where no child would ever again wake up in a cage, where strength would be used to protect rather than to oppress, and where the simple human idea of inherent dignity would spread from world to world until it transformed the very nature of galactic civilization. Tomorrow they would take another step toward making those dreams real, and the day after that, another step, and another until the cages were empty and the galaxy was free. But tonight they slept peacefully in their warm beds, surrounded by safety and love, knowing that they were not alone and never would be again. The revolution of kindness had found 5 more soldiers. 5 years had passed since that first morning on Haven Colony, and the cubs were cubs no longer. Razak had grown into a powerful young male with the distinctive black stripes of his father's lineage, but his golden eyes held wisdom and compassion rather than the cold, predatory gleam that many expected from his species. At his side stood Kira, now a graceful female whose intelligence had only grown sharper with age, and who could speak fluently in over 30 different galactic languages. They stood with their siblings on the observation deck of the starship Liberation, one of 12 vessels in the fleet that had grown from Marcus's original rescue ship. Through the transparent walls, they could see the industrial world of Cathara Prime growing larger as they approached. Somewhere on that polluted, overcrowded planet, hundreds of beings were trapped in slavery, waiting for rescue they didn't even know was coming. "Final mission briefing in 10 minutes, announced Captain Sarah Chen, the same Sarah who had welcomed them to Haven Colony years ago. Now she commanded the largest rescue ship in the fleet, her graying hair and weathered face testaments to the countless dangerous missions she had undertaken to liberate enslaved beings across the galaxy. Razak checked his equipment one more time. As the fleet's chief technical specialist, he had designed much of the gear they would use today. Stealth generators that could hide their approach, cutting tools that could slice through the strongest cage materials, and communication devices that could translate distress calls in real time. But his most important creation was the portable medical unit that Zeta would carry, a device that could stabilize seriously injured beings until they could receive proper treatment. "You ready for this, little sister?" Thorne asked Zeta, though she wasn't little anymore. At 17, she was the youngest member of the rescue team, but also one of the most skilled medics in the fleet. Her small size, inherited from their mother's lineage, made her perfect for infiltrating confined spaces where larger rescuers couldn't go. "As ready as I'll ever be," Zeta replied, her voice calm and confident. "Dr. Venn says the intelligence reports show at least 40 beings in the main compound, most of them suffering from malnutrition and various injuries. I've prepared treatment protocols for the most likely conditions we'll encounter." Myra looked up from her tactical display, where she had been studying the security patterns around their target facility. As the team's security chief, she had spent weeks analyzing guard rotations, surveillance systems, and escape routes. Her natural caution and analytical mind had saved countless lives over the years. "The good news is that security is lighter than we expected," she reported. "The bad news is that it's lighter because they've moved most of the slaves to an auction that's happening tomorrow. We need to move fast if we're going to intercept them." "Then we move fast," Kira said simply. As the fleet's chief communications officer, she had already established contact with underground resistance groups on Cathara Prime. "I've been in touch with the local human cell. They've identified the auction location and confirmed that the slaves are being held in a temporary facility near the spaceport." Marcus joined them on the observation deck, now older and grayer, but with the same kind eyes that had first offered them hope in that slave market so long ago. He wore the simple uniform of the Liberation Fleet, with its distinctive emblem: 5 linked circles representing the unity of different species working together for freedom. "I know I don't need to remind you," he said quietly, "but this mission is more dangerous than most. Cathara Prime is controlled by the Dominion Syndicate, and they have significant military resources. If something goes wrong—" "We know the risks," Razak interrupted gently, "but we also know what happens if we don't take them. Those beings in the auction tomorrow will be scattered across the galaxy, and most of them will never see freedom again." Marcus nodded, pride and worry warring in his expression. These 5 had become more than rescued cubs to him. They were his adopted children, his greatest achievement, and now they were about to undertake one of the most dangerous missions of their careers. "Remember," he said, "the mission parameters haven't changed in 5 years. We save who we can, but we don't throw away lives trying to save everyone. Every being we lose means one less rescuer for future missions." The Liberation dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Cathara system, immediately activating the stealth systems that Razak had spent 3 years perfecting. The ship became nearly invisible to most scanning systems, appearing to be nothing more than cosmic debris drifting through space. "Initial scans confirm the intelligence," reported Lieutenant Torres from the bridge. "Large concentration of life signs at the target facility, multiple species, stress indicators consistent with captivity conditions." Captain Chen activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All teams, this is Liberation Actual. Mission is a go. Remember, we're here to liberate, not to fight. Avoid unnecessary confrontation, prioritize the safety of the enslaved beings, and maintain communication protocols at all times." The rescue team consisted of 15 beings from 7 different species, all working together with the precision that came from years of training and shared purpose. The Cubs, as the 5 Predators were still sometimes called, had become the core of the most effective rescue unit in the fleet. They loaded into the stealth shuttle that Razak had designed, a sleek vessel that could carry 20 beings while remaining nearly undetectable to most sensor arrays. As they descended toward Cathara Prime's polluted atmosphere, each team member ran through their assigned role one final time. Myra would establish a secure perimeter and monitor for threats. Thorn would locate and prepare food and water for the rescued beings. Malnutrition was common among slaves, and many would be too weak to travel without immediate nutritional support. Kira would handle communications, coordinating with local resistance groups and translating for beings who didn't speak common galactic languages. Zeta would provide medical care, prioritizing the most seriously injured for immediate evacuation. And Razak would handle the technical aspects, disabling security systems, cutting through barriers, and ensuring their escape route remained viable. "Landing in 2 minutes," announced their pilot, a former Calaxian fighter ace who had defected when she learned that her government was secretly funding slave operations. "Local resistance confirms that the guards just completed their evening patrol rotation. We have approximately 4 hours before the next security sweep." The shuttle touched down in an industrial area several kilometers from the target facility. The air was thick with chemical pollutants, and the sky was an unhealthy orange color from the waste of thousands of factories. This was the kind of world where slavery thrived, overcrowded, underregulated, with governments that looked the other way as long as the profits kept flowing. "Welcome to paradise," Thorne muttered as they disembarked. Even through their environmental filters, the smell of industrial waste was overwhelming. The rescue team moved through the shadows of abandoned factories and maintenance tunnels, using routes that local resistance members had scouted over weeks of careful preparation. The facility they were targeting was a processing center, a euphemistic name for a place where newly captured slaves were broken down physically and mentally before being sold. "Contact," Myra whispered over their communication system. 2 guards, armed, approaching the main entrance. Calaxian military equipment, probably ex-soldiers working private security. The team froze in place, using their natural abilities to become nearly invisible in the industrial shadows. Predators were naturally gifted at stealth, and years of training had honed these abilities to perfection. The guards passed by without noticing them, engaged in casual conversation about their evening plans. They seemed bored and overconfident, clearly not expecting any trouble on this backwater industrial world. Moving to insertion point Alpha, Razak reported softly. He had identified a maintenance shaft that led directly into the facility's lower levels, bypassing most of the security systems. One by one, the team slipped through the narrow opening and into the bowels of the processing center. The smell hit them immediately: fear, pain, unwashed bodies, and despair. It was a smell they all recognized from their own captivity, and it strengthened their resolve. "Life signs directly above us," Zeta whispered, checking her medical scanner. "Multiple species, elevated stress hormones, several showing signs of serious injury." They made their way through maintenance corridors and service areas, avoiding the main pathways where guards might patrol. The facility's layout was typical for slave operations, a maze of small cells and holding areas designed to prevent organized resistance or escape attempts. "First contact in 30 seconds, Kira announced, preparing her translation equipment. The first interactions with enslaved beings were always delicate. Many had been conditioned to fear any approach, even from potential rescuers. They emerged into a holding area filled with cramped cages, and the sight that greeted them was both familiar and heartbreaking. Dozens of beings from multiple species huddled in spaces barely large enough to contain them. The conditions were worse than what the cubs had endured. These slaves were being deliberately weakened to make them easier to handle. "It's okay," Kira said softly, her words automatically translated into multiple languages by her equipment. "We're here to help. We're going to get you out of this place." The response was immediate. Some beings pressed against their cage bars with desperate hope, while others shrank back in terror, convinced this was some new form of torture. A few simply stared with empty eyes, their spirits already broken by weeks or months of abuse. Razak went to work on the cage locks with tools designed specifically for this purpose. These weren't simple mechanical barriers. They were electronic systems with multiple security features. But he had encountered every type of lock used in the slave trade, and his fingers moved with practiced efficiency. "First group ready for evacuation," he announced as the cages began to open. "Medical assistance needed here, here, and here," he added, marking locations where beings appeared to be seriously injured. Zeta moved among the newly freed slaves with quiet competence, quickly triaging the most serious cases. A young Trillic had clearly suffered multiple broken bones that had healed incorrectly. An elderly Vorthak showed signs of severe malnutrition. Two human children, barely old enough to walk, clung to each other with the desperate instinct of those who had learned that only they could protect each other. "Transport shuttle ETA 15 minutes, reported their pilot over the communication system. "Local resistance confirms no unusual security activity. You're still clear for extraction." But as they worked to prepare the rescued beings for evacuation, Zeta made a discovery that changed everything. "Razak," she called urgently, "you need to see this." In the deepest part of the facility, they found a section that hadn't appeared on any of their intelligence reports. Behind a reinforced door that took all of Razak's skills to open, they discovered something that made even these experienced rescuers gasp in horror. Nursery cages. Dozens of them, each containing infant beings who couldn't have been more than a few months old. Cubs, hatchlings, pups, and human bobbies, all taken from their parents and being prepared for sale to the highest bidders. The youngest slaves in the galaxy, destined for lives that would be nothing but suffering. "How many?" Myra asked, her voice tight with controlled rage. 47, Zeta replied, already moving among the cages to assess the infants' conditions. "Multiple species. Most are malnourished but stable, but some of them," her voice caught, "some of them won't survive much longer without proper care." The implications were immediate and terrifying. Their shuttle could carry perhaps 20 adult beings safely. Adding 47 infants was impossible. They didn't have the space, the life support systems, or the specialized care equipment that baby beings required. "We need to call in additional ships," Myra said immediately. "Negative," came Captain Chen's voice over the communication system. We've detected increased security activity in orbit. Dominion Syndicate patrol ships are converging on your location. You have maybe 30 minutes before extraction becomes impossible. 30 minutes to save 47 bobbies and the dozens of adults they had already freed. It was a logistical nightmare with no clean solution. We can't leave them, Zeta said firmly, cradling a human infant who couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Look at them, they're helpless. Without us, they die. But if we try to take everyone and get caught, we all die, Myra pointed out with painful logic, including the bobbies. Razak's mind raced through possibilities, calculating weight distributions, life support requirements, and shuttle modifications that could be made on the fly. Give me 5 minutes, he said finally. I might have an idea. While Razak worked frantically to modify their shuttle's passenger compartment, the rest of the team continued evacuating the adult slaves. Each rescued being was a victory, but each also used up precious space and resources they might need for the bobbies. Time check, Thorne announced. 22 minutes to extraction deadline. Almost done, Razak replied, sweat beading on his fur despite the cool temperature of the facility. He was removing non-essential equipment from the shuttle and reconfiguring the life support systems to handle a massive overload. It was dangerous and improvised, but it might work. Wait, Kira said suddenly. I'm picking up additional transmissions, local resistance chatter. There's a second facility. The blood drained from every team member's face. Another facility meant more slaves, possibly hundreds more, and they were already at the limit of what they could rescue. Confirm that, Myra ordered. Kira worked frantically at her communication equipment, decoding resistance messages and cross-referencing them with orbital surveillance data. Confirmed. Secondary facility approximately 2 kilometers north of our current location. Unknown number of enslaved beings, but the resistance estimates at least 100. The mathematics were brutal and simple. They could save the beings they had found, plus the bobbies, if they pushed their equipment to the absolute limit and took enormous risks. Or they could leave the bobbies and some of the adults to try to reach the second facility. But they couldn't do both. We need to make a choice, Marcus's voice came over the communication system. He had been monitoring the situation from the liberation, and his words carried the weight of command and the pain of impossible decisions. I know what you're all thinking, but we can't save everyone. We have to prioritize. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Zeta, still cradling the human infant, looked up at her siblings with tears in her eyes. 5 years ago, she said quietly, we were the ones in cages. We were the ones waiting for someone to save us. Marcus could have bought just 1 or 2 of us. He could have chosen the strongest, the healthiest, the most useful. But he didn't. He chose to save all of us, even though it was harder, even though it was more expensive, even though it would have been more logical to leave some behind. She looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at her team. I can't become the person who decides which bobbies deserve to live and which ones don't. Razak closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with new determination. Then we don't choose, we find a way to save them all. The shuttle modifications are complete, he announced. Life support will be strained but functional. We can fit everyone if we stack the adult beings in the cargo compartments and secure the bobbies in the passenger area. It'll be uncomfortable and dangerous, but it's possible. What about the second facility? Thorne asked. We call in the cavalry, Kira replied, her fingers flying over her communication equipment. Every resistance cell on this planet, every sympathizer, every underground contact we've made over the years. We coordinate a planet-wide operation. She paused in her work to look at her siblings. Remember what Marcus taught us? 1 person helps 1 person, then 2 help 2, then 4 help 4. Tonight, we find out if 5 years of building networks and training allies was worth it. The next 20 minutes were a whirlwind of coordinated activity that would have been impossible without years of preparation and relationship building. Kira sent out-coded messages to resistance cells across Cathara Prime, activating sleeper agents and sympathizers who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Local human resistance members moved against the second facility simultaneously with other rescue teams. Sympathetic Calaxians in the Planetary Defense Force suddenly developed equipment malfunctions that delayed their response to security alerts. Vorthak dock workers began systematically disrupting spaceport operations to prevent slave ships from launching. Meanwhile, Razak completed the evacuation of both facilities. loading beings into the shuttle with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew that lives hung in the balance of every second. The modified shuttle was packed far beyond its safe capacity, with adult beings wedged into cargo compartments and 47 bobbies secured in improvised carriers throughout the passenger area. "This is going to be rough," their pilot warned as they lifted off from Cathara Prime's surface. "Life support is redlining, and we're carrying 3 times our recommended weight if we encounter any resistance." "We'll handle it," Myra replied grimly, monitoring the security frequencies for any sign of pursuit. The ascent to orbit was tense and dangerous. The overloaded shuttle struggled against the planet's gravity, and several times the life support systems triggered emergency alerts. But Razak's modifications held, and gradually they climbed toward the safety of space. "Liberation, this is Rescue 1, Kira transmitted as they broke through the upper atmosphere. "Package secured. 93 souls aboard, including 47 infants. Request immediate medical support and nursery preparation." "Copy Rescue 1. Outstanding work. Medical teams are standing by." But their troubles weren't over. As they approached the Liberation, Myra's security sensors detected something that made her blood run cold. "Dominion Syndicate ships dropping out of hyperspace," she announced. 3 heavy cruisers moving to intercept. ETA to weapons range, 8 minutes. The Liberation's engines came online immediately, but the massive rescue ship was never designed for combat. Its strength was in stealth and speed, not in fighting battles against military vessels. "All ships, this is Liberation Actual," Captain Chen's voice carried across the fleet communication network. "We have incoming hostiles and are heavily loaded with rescued beings. Escort ships, implement Protection Protocol 7. Suddenly, space around the Liberation filled with activity. Ships that had been lurking at the edge of the system under stealth conditions revealed themselves, their weapons powering up and their engines burning hot as they moved to engage the Syndicate vessels. "This is Admiral Rodriguez aboard the Defiant," came a new voice, speaking with crisp military authority. "Syndicate vessels, you are interfering with a humanitarian rescue operation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The Cubs stared at each other in amazement. Admiral Rodriguez was a legend in the galactic military, a human officer who had been instrumental in several major campaigns against slavers and pirates. The fact that she was here now, providing escort for their rescue mission, spoke volumes about how far their movement had grown. "Negative, Defiant. These are territorial waters of the Dominion Syndicate. Your presence here is illegal." "Actually," Admiral Rodriguez replied calmly, "as of 6 hours ago, the Galactic Council voted to recognize the Universal Charter of Sentient Rights, which specifically prohibits slavery in any form. The Dominion Syndicate's activities here are now classified as crimes against sentience, and the Earth Alliance Navy is authorized to intervene." The implications hit the rescue team like a physical blow. The Universal Charter that humans had been promoting for years, the same document that declared every sentient being's inherent right to freedom, it had finally been adopted by the galactic government. Slavery was now illegal across the entire galaxy. "Furthermore," Admiral Rodriguez continued, "I have with me several other naval vessels representing species that have suffered under your slave operations. I believe you'll find them highly motivated." As if summoned by her words, additional ships began appearing throughout the system. Calaxian defense cruisers, Vorthak assault vessels, even a massive Ursine dreadnought that dwarfed everything else in the area. The fleet represented a coalition of species that had suffered under the Syndicate's slavery operations, now united in their determination to end it forever. "This is impossible," the Syndicate commander transmitted, but his voice carried the unmistakable note of fear. "The Galactic Council would never." "The Galactic Council," Admiral Rodriguez replied, "was finally convinced by testimony from several rescued beings who provided detailed evidence of systematic slavery and abuse. Beings who had been thought lost forever, but who were returned to their people by the Liberation Fleet." The Cubs looked at each other with sudden understanding. Over the past 5 years, their rescue operations had saved thousands of beings from slavery. Many of those beings had returned to their home worlds as advocates for freedom, sharing their stories and building political support for anti-slavery measures. Tonight's rescue wasn't just about saving 93 individuals. It was the culmination of years of careful relationship building and political change. You have 30 seconds to withdraw, Admiral Rodriguez announced. Otherwise, I will be forced to consider you pirates and slavers operating illegally in Council space. The Syndicate ships held their position for a long moment, weapons charged and ready for combat. Then, apparently calculating the odds of survival against the combined fleet arrayed against them, they powered down their weapons and jumped back into hyperspace. "Liberation, you are clear for departure," Admiral Rodriguez transmitted. "And congratulations on tonight's work. What you've accomplished here will be remembered for generations." The trip back to Haven Colony took 3 days, during which the Liberation's medical staff worked around the clock to care for the rescued beings. Many of the adults required extensive treatment for malnutrition, injuries, and psychological trauma. But it was the Bobbies who required the most attention. 47 infants from different species, each with their own specific nutritional and environmental needs. Dr. Venn and her staff had to quickly research the care requirements for species they had never treated before. But gradually, with patience and expertise, they began to stabilize their tiny patients. "The good news," Dr. Venn reported to the cubs as they helped with infant care, "is that all 47 Bobbies will survive. The bad news is that most of them were taken from their families so young that they may never remember their birth names or cultural heritage." Zeta looked down at the human infant she had been feeding, a tiny girl with dark hair and curious eyes. "Then we'll help them create new ones. Haven Colony has experience raising orphaned children from multiple species. They'll grow up knowing they're loved and valued. Some of them might even choose to join the Liberation Fleet when they're older," Kira added. "Like we did." It was true. Over the years, many of the beings rescued by the fleet had chosen to dedicate their lives to rescuing others. The movement had grown from Marcus's single ship to a coalition of dozens of vessels, hundreds of crew members, and thousands of sympathizers across the galaxy. When they finally arrived at Haven Colony, they were greeted by crowds of beings who had gathered to welcome the new refugees. Former slaves who now lived as free citizens, children who had been rescued from similar circumstances, and humans who had dedicated their lives to the cause of liberation. But it was Marcus who met them at the landing platform, his eyes bright with tears as he watched the cubs emerge from the shuttle, carrying some of the Bobbies they had rescued. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, embracing each of them in turn. "All of you, you've become everything I hoped you would be and more." "We learned from the best," Razak replied, holding a small Trilek infant who was already showing signs of recovering from her ordeal. That evening, Haven Colony held a celebration to welcome the new arrivals. But for the cubs, the most important part was a quiet conversation they had with Marcus under their old tree, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "What's next?" Thorne asked. "With slavery now illegal across the galaxy, will there still be a need for the Liberation Fleet?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Laws don't end slavery any more than they end any other crime. They just drive it underground. There will always be beings who value profit over freedom, who see others as property rather than people. The fight isn't over, it's just entering a new phase." "But we did make a difference," Zeta said softly, watching some of the rescued children playing in the gardens nearby. "You made an enormous difference, not just tonight, but over these past 5 years. You proved that rescue and rehabilitation work. You showed that beings from any background can choose to dedicate their lives to helping others. And you helped build the political coalition that finally outlawed slavery across the galaxy." He looked at each of them seriously. "But perhaps most importantly, you proved something that humans have always believed, that how you start life matters far less than how you choose to live it. 5 years ago, you were helpless victims. Tonight, you're heroes who saved 93 lives. That transformation didn't happen because of anything special about humans. It happened because of something special about you." Kira leaned against Marcus's shoulder, something she had done since she was a frightened cub, but which felt different now, that she was a grown female who had commanded rescue operations across the galaxy. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for seeing us as more than our species' reputation, for treating us as individuals rather than property, for giving us the chance to become who we chose to be." "Thank you for becoming it," Marcus replied. As the stars came out overhead, shining down on a colony filled with beings from hundreds of different worlds living together in peace, the cubs reflected on their journey from that horrible slave market to this moment of triumph. They had traveled light years through space, but the real journey had been internal, from fear to courage, from helplessness to agency, from victims to heroes. In the nursery buildings nearby, 47 bobbies were sleeping safely for the first time in their young lives, cared for by beings who saw them as precious gifts rather than commodities to be sold. Some of those bobbies would grow up to become teachers, artists, scientists, or engineers. Others might choose to join the Liberation Fleet and dedicate their lives to rescuing others as they themselves had been rescued. But all of them would grow up free, knowing that they were valued for who they were rather than what they could produce. They would learn languages and histories from across the galaxy. They would form friendships with beings of different species, learning that diversity was strength rather than division. And someday, when they were adults facing their own choices about how to live their lives, they would remember the story of how they came to be free. They would remember the humans who risked everything to save strangers, the Predotar cubs who chose compassion over revenge, and the coalition of species that came together to declare that freedom was a universal right rather than a privilege to be granted or withheld. The revolution of kindness would continue, carried forward by each new generation of beings who chose to extend the same mercy to others that had once been extended to them. It would spread from world to world, species to species, until the very concept of slavery became as obsolete as the primitive weapons of ancient wars. But that was the future. Tonight, 93 beings who had awakened in cages were falling asleep in safety and freedom. Tonight, 5 young Predators who had once been helpless victims were resting as seasoned heroes who had proven that the greatest strength was not in the ability to dominate others, but in the choice to lift them up. Tonight, the galaxy was a little brighter, a little freer, and a little more hopeful than it had been the night before. And tomorrow, they would make it even better.